This guy here is the star of the show today. This is a Presto 23 quart pressure canner, and these are available online all over the place for under $100. Usually you can find them for around 80, 90 bucks. Amazon, eBay, that kind of thing. Most people first start out growing mushrooms and they decide they want to make their own grain spawn. And you basically have to have a pressure canner to do that. So this is what most people start with. It's very affordable. It works great. I have two of them. I've used them hundreds of times. The only catch with these Prestos is if I flip the lid over here, these come with a sealing ring, and you can see it here. It's basically just like a gasket. Pops out really easy. These will compress and get kind of like a memory over time, and your lid won't seal as well. So you are going to need to buy some extras of these if you're going to use your pressure cooker a lot. Usually when you get the ring, it also comes with a replacement little safety button here. And this is basically just a overpressure safety device so that if your pressure cooker gets too high in pressure, this will blow out before the whole thing explodes. There's another company called All American, and they make an awesome pressure cooker. For one similar in size to this, you're going to pay around $350 though. So, but you're basically going to have it for a lifetime, and the thing will just run and run and run and run. So if you really think you're going to like grow commercially, you might want to look at All American. But if you're just going to dabble, these Presto 23 quarts are fine. They work great. But what I'm going to show you today is we're going to get a reishi grow rolling. We had a subscriber, JJJ, request that I do reishi. So I'm going to get that rolling today. So shout out to JJJ for requesting that. And what I'm going to show you is how to get the most out of this Presto 23 quart in terms of doing grain spawn. I don't use bags when I do grain spawn. I prefer jars. These pressure cookers get hot spots sometimes, and your bags will melt and fail. I just don't really like doing bags. I prefer jars. So we're going to do jars today. And obviously you need to get a heating unit as well. When you're running this thing doesn't heat itself up. So if you have an electric stove, that works great, like an electric range. Gas isn't really recommended for these. Some people pull it off, but it's a little tricky. What I did is I bought two of these 1300 watt Wearing Pro electric side burners. And again, these are available online for around 70, 80 bucks. They work great, and they will definitely run a Presto 23 quart, provided you don't put way too much water, which is a mistake that a lot of people make when they first start running these pressure canners. So we're going to talk about that today as well. We're using wheat grain today for spawn, and I've already filled our jars up here. These jars actually hold a little over 3 pounds of grain spawn in each jar. So I know I wanted to end up with around 13 pounds of grain. And because I've worked with wheat a lot, I know that wheat increases by about 50% in weight when you soak it overnight in water. And so I started with around 9 pounds of wheat. And it was perfect to fill these 4 jars with a little bit left over, which is not a big deal. I'll throw that outside for the birds. But what I do with the wheat is I weigh it up into a pot like this, and I get as hot as your tap water will run. Just run your tap water really hot and get enough in here to cover the wheat plus a few extra inches, because the grain is definitely going to expand overnight, and just soak it overnight. Some people like to put their grain like in a pot and heat it up right on the stove and hydrate their grain that way. I prefer not to do that. In my experience, that leads to more burst grain kernels. They kind of explode like popcorn in the hot areas of the pot, and the more burst kernels you have, the higher your risk of contamination. So just get in a pot, soak it overnight, and the next day, this is just a shallow plastic storage tote. I just lay out a bath towel in there and strain off the grain in a strainer, rinse it with a little cold water, and pour it out into this container with the towel. And at that point, you want to let it air dry for at least a few hours. You don't want your grain really, really wet. So just let it air dry for a few hours. If you're going to leave it longer than that, this actually sat for about 8 hours, which is fine. I just kind of covered it with a towel as it was sitting in here. And just use a plastic solo cup to scoop it out and fill our jars up. Now these jars are key in maximizing your spawn production in this Presto 23 quart. What these jars are Mount Olive pickle jars. I'm in the pickle aisle at Walmart here, so we have quite a few brands. These are my favorite right here, the Mount Olive. That's the jar you want right there. And those are $4.24 a jar, which is pretty reasonable actually. And then they have some great value Walmart brand ones here that appear to be about the same jar, and those are $4. Both those are work. They have these Vlasics. Oh, sorry. Yeah, these will work, but they're not as good because they don't have a lip as pronounced of a lip up here at the top. I just pick some of these up, and then you just gotta have a big pickle party, get rid of them. It's a lot of pickles. I probably stocked up on about 20 or so of these guys. It took a while, but we took care of them. Basically, I'm getting 13 pounds of grain spawn in one run in the pressure cooker, which is pretty dang good. So it's a little tricky getting the lids. I'm going to show you the way I do my lids on here. We're going to use some Tyvek. We have some discs cut out of some good Tyvek here, and we have some zip ties. These are, what are these guys? I think they're 14-inch zip ties. I have my tape measure here. So these are, let's see, these are about, I would say 7 inches across, maybe 7¼ inches across, these discs. And you want to get good Tyvek. A lot of people just want to use like the Tyvek envelopes from the Postal Service. Do not do that. You got to have good Tyvek if you're going to do Tyvek lids. A trichoderma spore could fly a jumbo jet through postal Tyvek. So don't use that. This is from a company called Into the Wind. It's actually a company that sells kite supplies, and Tyvek is used for kites as well. So it comes folded like this in big sheets. And what I do is I just have like a storage container here. What is this? It's like a Gladware container. 48 ounce. I think that says 6 cups. So I just use this to trace out what circle size I need, and that works great for these Mount Olive pickle jars. Okay, so here's the tricky part with this process. We have our single sheet of Tyvek here, and what I'm going to do is lay this over the lid. You want to kind of adjust it so it's right in the middle, and then I just kind of take both hands and kind of crease it and form it over the top of that jar. Like so. So you want to cut it big enough that you have some, a little bit of a skirt going around it like this. So then you're going to take your 14-inch zip tie, and I got these at Lowe's. You do want to get decent zip ties. You want to make sure they're nice and rubbery and flexible. Don't just buy like the super cheap ones. You get the really cheap cable ties or zip ties. They don't bend really easily. They're really stiff. And I've actually had those like pop loose in the pressure cooker on me. These are, let me see. These are Utilitech 14-inch cable ties, and these came from Lowe's, I'm pretty sure. And these guys work great. So you can get your hands on some of those. But what you want to do is come below this ridge. There's this ridge that goes all the way around the jar here. It's the lip that sticks the furthest out. So lay that over that like that, and just put your zip tie on it. Make sure your lid's holding nice and tight, and just pull that zip tie nice and tight. We have our 4 jars all lidded up here. What I do to cinch these down is I'll grab it like right here and just kind of rock it like this. You'll get a click, grab it, rock it, get a click, and just grab it, rock it, get a click. That's the best way to tighten these down without your jars slipping or you know, breaking your zip tie or anything like that. So also when it comes out of the pressure cooker and you have to retighten these down again, that's a good method to go with. Instead of trying to pull on it and maybe accidentally cutting it or anything, just grab it loosely and rock. And again, when you rock with your diagonal cutters, you want to make sure you're not hitting your diagonal cutters into the Tyvek and nicking it that way. Again, I was really careful when I tightened these down, so I wouldn't nick my Tyvek. But like I said, if you do, just use a little clear nail polish like that. And so just look, you know, right where you tightened your zip ties down here, and just make sure you didn't nick the Tyvek anywhere. That's looking good. These lids are going to allow our grain spawn to breathe, and they're also going to allow us to inject our liquid culture right through the Tyvek and then seal it up. And so Tyvek's a great lid material, but again, don't use junk Tyvek. Buy the good Tyvek. And again, I'll put a link in the description to Into the Wind Kite Supply Company, and they sell good Tyvek. So now, we talked before about not putting too much water in your pressure cooker. This is very important. We have 2 quarts of water here. I'm going to pour this in and show you guys what this looks like here. That's 2 quarts of water. That is all you need. You don't want to put too much water in this thing. If you do, it's not going to heat up for you. It's going to take forever, or it's not going to reach maximum PSI, and you do have to reach that 15 PSI mark to really sterilize your grain. So we'll sit our jars in here. Again, just being really careful not to nick your Tyvek, because that is your barrier between your awesome grain spawn and all the evil contaminants floating around in the air here. So watch those tag ends on your zip ties too. Make sure you're not nicking anything. There we go. And you can see that's a super tight fit. We got 13 pounds of spawn in glass with good lids. And we're going to put it on the 1300 watt side burner over there and get her up to 15 PSI. And what I'll do is I'm just going to let these cool down right inside the pressure cooker. I'm not going to take the lid off. When we hit the 90-minute mark, I'm just going to pull the power, turn the side burner off, and just let this cool down. It's going to take a long time. You don't want to mess around with pressure cookers. Never remove a lid or anything when it's under pressure. Just let it cool down on its own. And you basically have to let these jars get to room temperature anyway before you can inoculate them. You can't squirt LC onto hot grain because you'll kill it, obviously. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and I'm just going to turn it off, and I'm going to let it cool down overnight. And I'll get at it in the morning. As long as that lid's on there and everything's sealed up, you should be okay. So like I said, never pull the lid off your pressure cooker when it's under pressure. And you know, be very careful. Read the instructions, read the directions and everything. Make sure you follow them when you're working with these things, because these things are no joke, you know, so you can really get burnt or worse. And I don't recommend getting, you know, a hand-me-down pressure cooker from your uncle or something that's been sitting in his shed for 40 years. And don't buy like a junk pressure cooker from a garage sale or something like that, because I've seen some pretty nasty pressure cooker explosions, and it's serious stuff. So be careful. Don't mess around. By the way, our cordyceps are looking lovely here. I don't know if you can see them. It's kind of foggy in there, but they're growing nicely. So they're looking good. But these are going to be our reishi jars for our big reishi grow here. So we're going to fire them up. One other thing I want to mention, if you're going to use one of these Waring Pro side burners or a similar side burner, these do have enough juice to run this cooker. but just barely, not a lot to spare. So you want to make sure to really line up your pot evenly on that burner. So check it from the side, from the front, make sure you're evenly on that burner, you're getting nice even heat, and that's going to help make sure that we can run this cooker. I usually start off around 4.5 until our little pressure valve locks up here. You'll see this will pop up, and sometimes you got to help it along. It'll be very hot, but you'll see it'll start spitting, sputtering, spitting out water. And I'll just take like a screwdriver or a spoon or anything metal and hold it down for about 10 seconds and then let off, and then it'll just shoot up and lock up. So at that point, once that locks up, I'll go ahead and bump it up to 5 and just run it at 5 for the rest of the cooking period. Now, you can run this on a timer as well. Right now, I just have it plugged in because I'm going to set a timer on the stove upstairs and just watch it. These also come with a pressure gauge, obviously, and we're going to go up to 15 psi here. And at that point, this little rocker is designed to start rocking and spitting and sputtering too at 15 psi. You'll know that's when you're there. So this is going to take a little while to heat up. I would say it's probably going to be about 15-20 minutes before we're spitting and sputtering here on this. Our pressure cooker has been heating up about 20 minutes, and it's just starting to sputter here. You can see the water sputtering out of the little valve that's got a lock up there. So sometimes this will just pop up and lock by itself. Sometimes it needs a little help. Again, this lid is very hot at this point, so do not touch it. I'm going to use a screwdriver here, and I'm just going to hold this down for about 10 seconds. And that's going to allow a little pressure to build inside the pot. And then when I release the screwdriver, it should pop right up and start the pressurization process. So let's see. Boom. There we go. So now we're going to start pressurizing, and our gauge is going to run up to 15 psi here. Once we hit 15 psi, our rocker is going to start rocking, and that's when you start the timer. We need to go 90 minutes from when we reach 15 psi. So when it gets up fully pressurized, I'm going to start the timer, and we'll run it to completion, and I'll turn the power off and let it cool down overnight, and we'll knock it up in the morning with some reishi LC. Also, now that we're locked and loaded and pressurizing, I'm going to go ahead and bump our side burner up to 5. I have the flow hood running now, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I just pulled the pressure cooker off, moved it over to the in front of the flow hood. Everything here has been sprayed down with rubbing alcohol as usual. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove our jars out of the pressure cooker, move them in front of the flow hood immediately, and tighten down those zip ties. That's the most important part when you first pull your jars out. Pull them out, move them right in front of the flow hood or into your still air box, whatever you're using, and tighten those zip ties down right away. And I'm just going to use the diagonal cutters and just rock them and just click them over and make sure they're nice and tight and we're sealed. After that, I have a liquid culture syringe here. I have about probably 25 cc's of reishi, Ganoderma lucidum liquid culture in there. That's what we're going to squirt our jars up with. So each jar is going to get roughly, a little over 5 cc's. That'll be enough. And we have our propane torch and marker to label our jars. And when you inject through the Tyvek, what I do is I inject my 5-6 cc's, and then I'll take a dab of the clear nail polish and just dab it. After I remove the syringe, I'll dab it over the hole I just made and give it a minute to dry, and that clear nail polish will seal the syringe hole. And after that, I'll take just a small piece of the medical tape and tape over the hole. I'm gonna incubate these in some large plastic tubs like I have over there. Same thing the cordyceps is incubating in. You don't want to leave your jars in open air. Definitely get them inside a tub, and that'll minimize the airflow around them and greatly reduce your chances of contamination. So I'm gonna set the camera up here and you guys can watch me work. Our jars are nice and protected in our tub now. I went ahead and sprayed this, wiped it down with rubbing alcohol to sterilize it, and it'll reduce the airflow around the jars and hopefully keep us from getting any contamination. I've been doing this method for about 15 years now, and I've had very low contamination rates. So we're doing a pretty good volume of grain spawn with low-cost materials and getting really low contamination rates. So that's a good thing. And they will stay in here to incubate. One thing I do is now we have a full Tyvek lid, so we're getting a lot of air exchange. But this is also a lot of spawn. So with a big volume of spawn like this, you need a lot of airflow, or else your spawn's going to choke out and you're not going to get full colonization. But what you can run into, and you need to kind of just monitor this based on your ambient humidity and airflow, is sometimes I'll see the grains on top will actually get too dry with this method and you won't get full colonization. So I'll use these foil lids, and a couple days after they go into the tubs and the lids have had a chance to get nice and dry, I'll take one of these foil lids and just loosely dome it over the top to just kind of slow down the airflow a little bit, and it'll still breathe really well. But if you just loosely dome it, it'll slow it down and keep those grains on top from drying out and not being able to fully colonize. Make sure you don't really cram the foil lid down on there. That'll choke it out too much. Just kind of loosely dome it over the top of the Tyvek and you'll be fine. So just to recap, I injected our LC, wiped it down quickly with our alcohol towel, and dabbed some clear nail polish on there. Let that dry for a couple minutes, and that'll seal our injection hole. and then I went ahead and took some medical tape and just put a piece of that over the top. And when I use medical tape, you always want to discard this first couple inches because this is just hanging out in open air and that'll collect contaminants. So discard this. Theoretically, everything on the roll should be pretty clean. So just put a piece over the nail polish once it's dried. And then I gave our jars a little shake as well. What you'll see is your grains on the bottom when they come out of the pressure cooker will be too wet. They'll almost look kind of wet and slimy down there. So I'll usually give them a little shake like you saw when I was working in front of the flow hood and just kind of redistribute those grains. And I may give these one more shake. I'll see how the colonization goes. Usually when they get about half colonized, I'll go ahead and give them another shake. But if you're going to do that, make sure you spray everything down with alcohol again. Everything's nice and clean. And do your shake in front of the flow hood. If you do that, it's going to speed up your colonization because you're going to evenly distribute everything. And as long as you make sure everything's clean and do it in front of the flow hood or in your still air box, you shouldn't get any contamination. So we'll go ahead and let these run. I'm hoping to see some mycelium growth in, I'm guessing, about 4 or 5 days. Might see them starting to germinate. And at that point, we'll just monitor it. And eventually we're going to put these onto some pasteurized hardwood fuel pellet bags. And one of these jars will do 2 bags. So we'll end up with 8 bags total of Ganoderma lucidum running once we move it to sawdust. Also, I'm going to take just a bath towel here, and I'm going to cover this tub just to keep it a little dark. It doesn't need to be in total darkness by any means. A lot of people think when you're running mycelium, it needs to be in total darkness. It really doesn't. You just don't want any direct light. You just want low light conditions. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover it up with a towel, keep it a little dark, and it should run fine.